Greetings, esteemed viewer. This is Rob Kent, and this is another episode of Middle Grade Ninja TV. Today we're with Jeff Norton. I, of course, am the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is available in audiobook, paperback, and the ebook is always free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write horror novels that are relevant to today's discussion. Got 2 zombie novels available. And then I've also got a series of 5 books, the Book of David, specifically about UFOs and flying saucer lore in a haunted house. It's good times, but that's for older readers. The first chapter, knowing you've got this much book left to go, the first chapter is free to download as an ebook whenever you're listening to this. Let's say a big welcome to my guest, Jeff Norton. Jeff, hi, how are you?
Hey, Rob, I'm good, and thanks for having me on the Hangout. This is fantastic. So
tell esteemed viewer about yourself and where we can find out more about you and the things that you've written.
Sure, yeah. So I live in London. Despite my accent, I live in London, England. I've been here for about 12 years. I grew up in Canada originally, but I moved around the US quite a bit. So I moved over from LA just over 12 years ago. And I've done lots of different things within the entertainment industry, but I'm primarily a writer, creator, television producer, and there's loads more than you ever wanted to know about me at jeffnorton.com.
Can we ever know too much?
There is too much, yeah.
Probably so. So tell us a little bit about your company, Awesome, and why a guy like you who's writing about zombies and aliens is also involved in a project called Princess Ponies.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I really see myself as a storyteller, as a creator, first and foremost. And Awesome Media and Entertainment is the production company that grew out of the things that I wrote. And it's really Awesome is 2 things. It's a production company, so we work with co-production partners and broadcasters, primarily to bring books to screen, which is the area that I've been involved in for a long time now. And then we also are getting increasingly involved in publishing and bringing optioning in other people's book rights so that we can help bring those to the screen as well. But to your question about ponies, I write things I'm passionate about, and I try and help others do the same thing. But the Ponies Project is actually one that's very near and dear to my heart. So a bunch of years ago, probably 6 or so years ago, my little niece, Isla, who's now north of 10, she's now just turned 10. At the time, she was graduating out of Dora the Explorer. And you probably know Dora. It's a huge, big franchise for Nickelodeon.
Unfortunately, we're very familiar with Dora the Explorer at the Kent household, yes.
And actually, Dora is great. I mean, Dora is an intrepid adventurer. She's got a lot of amazing qualities. She's actually a great little role model for very young people. The problem is you graduate out of Dora, and often there's nowhere to go. And at the time, my sister was very frustrated that her eldest daughter was basically being dumped into the pink ghetto, sort of Barbies and princesses and damsel in distress and all that kind of stuff. And so she asked me if I could do something about that. Now, at the time, I was writing a series called MetaWars, which is a young adult tech thriller. And I thought, I don't know I can't do anything about this. I'm not able to create something that would, be right for young girls. But the more I thought about it, I thought, actually, I probably could. So despite its pink and sparkly covers, Princess, which I think is, there's one here. This is one of the books that I think they sell these at Costco, at the club stores. Despite the pink and sparkly covers, it's basically ass-kicking swashbuckling for little girls. It's think The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings for 7 or 8-year-old girls. And it's very much about courage. So if My Little Pony is about friendship and horseplay and hairplay, Princess Ponies, despite the covers, is fundamentally about courage and believing in yourself. And it's basically about this little girl who gets magically transported to an enchanted island where she effectively becomes a superhero. So in a way, I think it was a little bit ahead of its time, but the books have done phenomenally well. They're published by Bloomsbury, who are the same folks that publish Harry Potter. There's 12 of them now. We're working on 4 more, so there'll be 16 in a series, and people just can't seem to get enough of them. In fact, there's one coming out, pretty sure it's this one, which is Seasons Gallopings, which is a Christmas-themed one that'll come out from Bloomsbury in just a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, Halloween's officially over. It's time to start plugging Christmas hard. So
Exactly.
you were meant to bring her out of the pink ghetto, and it sounds like you kind of met halfway. She dragged you down into the pink ghetto a little bit, but you were able to find a way to relate to those stories and to bring some of the things that you love to that, and to expand your horizons and tell stories that you otherwise don't have experience telling.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. One of the things that was hard for me as an author who has some experience with branding and brand building and brand creation and things like that is that if it were up to me, the covers would look like an Indiana Jones poster, and maybe we would have sold 5 copies, perhaps. I don't know. Bloomsbury, ultimately, they control what the artwork looks like. So when you submit your manuscript, I basically control the words. And I must say, I write these with a fantastic woman called Julie Sykes. We do them together under the pen name Chloe Ryder. So it's not just me; it's 2 of us that do it as a team, which is a
So
lot of fun.
how does that collaboration work back and forth? Do you write some and then you send it to her and she adds some, or do you do it
That's exactly right.
simultaneously?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's very collaborative. I probably tend towards plot, character, and the story arc. Julie's great with prose and making the actual pages really sing, but we go back and forth, and I overwrite her and she overwrites me. It's very collaborative. It's actually a lot of fun. But to your question, I think what I tried to bring to the idea was basically high fantasy adventure. Bloomsbury, decided that they would control what the covers looked like, and they did the pinks and the sparkles and all that stuff. And, we get a lot of letters from parents that basically all sound the same. And they all say, my daughter bought this from the Scholastic Book Fair, and it was pink and sparkly, and I totally groaned, and we don't want to be doing that. And we're trying to introduce her to other things that aren't pink. But oh my God, then we read them and they're so good and they're so empowering. And the word we get is empowering all the time. So you know what, if the pinks and the sparkles get people into the door, it's bad pun, but it's like a Trojan horse. And then if they get hooked by a great story,
I love
then
bad puns.
I'm happy.
That's
But yeah, no,
outstanding.
it's a fun series. I love working on them. And it's funny because it's not, and the only reason they're primarily not under my name, one is because it's a collaboration, but 2, at the time I was writing these MetaWars books, which are pretty hardcore, fairly violent, kind of in the Hunger Games, Maze Runner kind of space. And I didn't think that parents of 7 or 8-year-old girls would want to buy a series from this guy, Jeff Norton, who is also known for writing these high-octane tech thrillers. So that was the decision I made. For right or wrong, I don't know if I got that right, but the books have done really well, so I'm happy to see them out there in the world.
Well, if they're doing really well and you're empowering young girls, that sounds right enough to me.
I think so, yeah. No, I'm pretty happy with it.
And then you're also a TV producer. You have a lot of experience making some short films and producing television. So I wanted to make sure I ask you, what is the big difference between collaborating on a project like Princess Ponies, writing your own story, or working with, I assume, a pretty large group of people specifically to create a visual medium that you're probably going to have less control over than you would your own novel?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think really the key is exactly as you said, that the word collaboration. So, the more expensive a project is, generally speaking, the more people are involved in it. And generally speaking, the more you're trying to de-risk it creatively, right? So if you're sitting down to write a book, you basically have full control. I mean, MetaWars or Neurotic Zombie or Alienated, those are great examples. I mean, those are books where, when I sit down, I am the director, the showrunner, the editor. I mean, obviously I work with an editor who works with my words, but I'm in complete control over what the reader experiences. If you're trying to do something for the screen, for example, I've done loads of things, but I did a preschool show, a couple seasons of a preschool show, which was animated. And there were literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved in different locations all around the world. We had people in Toronto, we had people in Malaysia. And when you're doing something like that, you've got a network involved, you've got development executives, you've got heads of department, heads of animation. And really the role there is just make sure that everybody's singing from their same song sheet. I call it keeping it honest. And I guess the role that I always try and play, whether it's my own work or whether I'm helping somebody else, another author, get their projects made, is to be the keeper of the tone. Because I think that's the one thing that an author brings to their written work is a point of view on the world. And even though the story may have to evolve and change for the screen, I think if you can keep that author's voice and that tone, that's probably that's kind of the most sacred thing I can wrap my arms around to kind of protect for an author.
So, what for people that are thinking that they might want to participate in a film adaptation or a YouTube series or whatever they want to do with their project, what specific steps do you take to help maintain that tone?
I guess for me, it's really about understanding where it's coming from and making sure right at the very beginning of a process that the people who are going to go on that journey with you see the same vision. And again, I don't want to get into all the semantics of how the legal is done and optioning and all that stuff. But as your viewers might know, typically what happens is when somebody options a book from an author, there's all sorts of legalese that basically say that production company or that studio basically can do whatever they want. Now, sometimes there's some carve outs, and sometimes, the author can say, well, you can't do this, or things that are morally ambiguous you can't do, or what have you. But generally speaking, you're kind of like selling your house. And if the next people want to redecorate it, they're legally allowed to do that. So what you want to do is you want to make sure from the get-go you have a trusting relationship with the people you're going to work with. And as much as possible, you want to have a voice at the table. So, Walking Dead is a good example. Robert Kirkman was an executive producer on that. He wrote, I think it was episode 5 of the first initial run. Skybound was his company. Circle of Confusion was his management company. So lots of people were working on his behalf. And so if you can do that as much as possible, have people that share your vision, that's probably the secret to success. When I do it, when I work with authors and help them, it's really about trust. It's really about making sure that everybody that we hire, everybody that wants to work on the project has the same tonal ambition, maybe a different story ambition, because story can change and plot can change, but that they have the same point of view, the same lens on the world.
That makes complete sense to me. And so I don't want to spend forever talking about your time as a video producer, because I don't want to talk to you about your books and being an author. That's what my viewers want to know more about. But I did want to ask you, were, I believe, a producer on the film version of Choose Your Own Adventure. Am I getting that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, those were books. Did you grow up with those, Rob? Did you
I absolutely grew up with them. I loved them, and if there was ever one property I would think that would just be impossible to adapt to a film medium, it would be the Choose Your Own Adventure. So how did you do it?
It was hard. It was an incredible creative challenge. So I grew up with those books. I was not a big reader as a boy, and they were really the book series that flipped me from being a reluctant reader to certainly a competent reader, if eventually an avid reader. And so when I was older, when I was a young adult, and I had been doing all sorts of basically internships in Hollywood, and I started at an agency and pushed a mail card at a big Hollywood agency, and I worked for Warner Brothers for a bit and Jim Henson Company for a bit. I did all sorts of basically development and sort of odd jobs around town. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to wrap my arms around a piece of IP, a piece of intellectual property, a story, an underlying story that I could help shape into something for the screen. And it was the first time I had ever done it. And I went after the rights to Choose Your Own Adventure. And the rights holders took a big leap of faith. And we were talking about trust earlier. And I think, they trusted that I had the best interests of that brand in my heart and in my head. And so what we ended up doing is we turned them into an interactive DVD movie. Now, this started in 2003. The film came out in 2006, which was well before the iPad. It was even before Blu-ray. So we basically had to hack the DVD spec to be able to deliver to the viewer a seamless branching narrative. We chose to do it animation. We chose to do it for a family audience. We had some amazing voice talent. We had William H. Macy, Frankie Muniz, who was just rolling off Malcolm in the Middle. And so what we did is we basically tried to recreate the experience of the books. But what we did do, the one change we made, which was fundamental, is that we created characters. We created a set of characters for you to go along the ride with them, a bit more like a movie than a video game. So instead of a first-person point of view, it was really a third person where you were going along the adventure with this one family. It was basically 3 kids and their uncle, and we adapted the book, The Abominable Snowman. So the adventure took place in the Himalayas. and the whole thing was about the sort of search for the mythical abominable snowman. It did really well. It was distributed in Walmart and all sorts of retailers all over the world. And I'm not involved in that project anymore, but it's still on Amazon. You can still order the DVD. And it's funny that years later, lots of my friends have got kids that are sort of 9, 10, and because it's a film that keeps going, because it's almost like a never-ending story. As you get to one ending and then it'll reboot and you can play it again. Yeah, it's a load of fun.
So unlike the actual never-ending story, it has no ending.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I always felt a bit ripped off of the never-ending story because there is a last page.
Well, then you get to the never-ending story part 2. It's just, come on, fellas, what are we doing here?
The still never-ending story.
Obviously, there's something about fiction that brings you back, because you've written, 6 or 7 novels? No, more than that. How many novels have you written now?
I think 8, including a picture book. I think that's right. And
is
not
that counting the Princess Ponies that you're a collaborator on? Because that boosts you up to what, like 19?
Like that. Something like that. 20.
And by the time
20 or 21,
this a month from now, I'm sure it'll be a higher number.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, so as you know, it takes a while.
What brings you back to fiction over doing a film that's much more passively viewed by your audience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm a big believer. I'm a big believer in the power of the written word, and I'm a huge believer that the imagination that we all have when we translate the written word, black ink on a white page, that process is magic. And what's amazing to me when we read is that we do create our own version of the movie in our heads. And often that's sometimes why films or television adaptations are disappointing. Because oh, it's not how I imagined it. And so one of the things that gives me a great deal of pleasure is being able to put down on the page just a bunch of words that a reader can then read, and in their own heart and in their own mind and in the theater of their imagination, concoct what the experience is. That's one thing. The other thing that I'm very attracted to, that I like a lot about the written word in fiction, as opposed to a more filmic approach, is internal narrative. Right, when you're doing something on the screen, you as the viewer are one step removed because you're watching a character go on a journey. Now you can empathize with that character and you can go on that ride with them, and if it's constructed well, if it's done well, it really kind of hits you here. But with a book, you're right in the head of the character, and so it's a much more intimate relationship with the character, and thus a much more intimate relationship with a story.
That makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. So let's talk about your fiction. I want to ask you more. You've talked a lot about, because you were a reluctant reader, then you discovered the Choose Your Own Adventure books that pulled you in and taught you to, that I believe reading is more of something you have to do to get better at. You don't start off good at it. You have to train just like the muscles of your brain, just like the muscles of your body. You have to train and become a greater reader. And that's kind of become your mission, is to transform reluctant readers like you were into diligent readers. How have you done that in your fiction? What is it that you do specifically to capture those reluctant readers?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is really important to me. I think I didn't know. Nobody told me that reading was a skill. Nobody told me that it was just something you had to practice at the same way you have to practice at any sport or a musical instrument. But I think what I try and do is I try and create books that are as fun as possible and that are as compellingly addictive as possible. So MetaWars is a great example. MetaWars is a thriller series. It's a total page turner. What I hear back from readers time and time again is that once they start reading it, they don't want to put it down. Now, I often hear from people's parents, they get very angry because their kids stay up way too late reading the books. So I get the kids in trouble because they're trying to stay up way past their bedtime reading. But
do you kind of apologize to the parents? Oh, I'm so sorry. But not really. I'm so excited for myself.
But not really, yeah. And I think that is a sign of that's a sign of success, right? If a young reader, particularly somebody who's maybe not that into books, or they'd rather play video games, or they'd rather do something else, if they can crack the spine of one of my books and not want to put it down, that's a big tick. And then similarly with something like, I write a book series called Memoirs of a Neurotic Zombie. And it's about a kid called Adam Meltzer. Adam is 12 years old. He's got OCD. And then the worst thing imaginable happens to him, which is he dies. And then he comes back as a zombie. And he's basically trying to solve effectively his own murder. But he's totally disgusted by himself. And it's a voice-driven book. And it's, I just wrote what I thought would be really fun and really funny. And readers seem to think that that's the case as well. So again, it's a different skill, if you will. It's a different hook to get a reader into fiction. It's using humor, not nonstop thrills, nonstop adventure. And I guess Alienated is kind of a fusion of the two. It's a fun and funny book, but it's also an adventure. And it's also a bit of a commentary on school and school life and, what it's like to try and navigate the social structures and hierarchies of particularly high school. But of course, I'm using the metaphor of aliens.
Well, they're both pretty good metaphors, dying, and then that's sort of like going through adolescence, is suddenly being disgusted with yourself and trying to figure out what's happened to you. And then with Alienated, I felt like very I very much empathize with Sherman Capote and his sister because they've gone to the school where they're surrounded by aliens, and I remember having that feeling when I went to middle school. Especially because I was never that great at sports, always great at reading, always great with anything involving the mind. But sports, I'm not poorly coordinated. And overnight, some of the other kids seemed to. I remember one of the boys was a beanpole, and literally, like the next day, like he'd been bitten by a radioactive spider in a Spider-Man movie. He came in just ripped. I was like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of a lottery. Genetics are paying off now for some folks and for other folks now. And I'm looking around like, how am I supposed to compete with that guy that woke up ripped with superpowers the next morning? And it's a little bit like you've gone to going through that experience. It's like you're suddenly surrounded by aliens and people that have powers that you don't.
I think that's right. I think it's not an uncommon experience. I mean, I was not dissimilarly. I wasn't particularly sporty when I was an adolescent. I was very short. I was very small and very short for my age, and a bit uncoordinated as well. And I wanted to try and allow the reader to sort of go on that same journey. And I think for younger readers, they do empathize because they might be going through the same thing. It's funny for adults, for people that have been through school and have been through high school, I get a lot of that same feedback was, oh my God, I was just like Sherman. I felt like a total outsider. I was the one. And it's only until you're later in life and you're an adult that you find, you and I find each other and we realize, oh God, we would have been friends in school. We felt like that, but you don't know it at the time, right? That's the thing. When you're going through it, you think that everybody else has got their stuff together. Everybody else is sitting at the cool table. And what you don't realize is probably about 95% of the people in the cafeteria are feeling a bit alienated. And that's really where that's the sort of double entendre where the title comes from.
But there, of course, are real aliens. So real quick, because you can do a better job of it than I can, give us, team viewer, kind of the elevator pitch. What is Alienated about?
So yeah, Alienated is a middle grade comedy adventure about the only two human kids at the high school for aliens at Area 51. So it's kind of inspired by things as random as John Hughes movies, Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, Men in Black. Somebody called it Harry Potter meets Star Wars, which makes me very happy because that's two of my favorite things. But
or could you want if you had some Batman in there, you'd have everything.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a fun adventure that's also poignant. So it comes from a real emotional place. So Sherman is 14 years old and he lives actually with his Air Force general father and his sister, who seems to be able to excel at everything. His sister, when we first meet her, is the lead in the school play. They live on an Air Force base, a NATO Air Force base in Germany. But it's the first anniversary of their mother's death. Their mom was an army nurse. She died in action in Afghanistan, and she always wanted to be an astronaut. And she was discouraged from that when she was a little girl, but she always had this dream that she would be an astronaut. And under US military law, if you go north of 60,000 feet, you're designated to get your astronaut wings. And so on the first anniversary of her death, Sherman takes her ashes in an urn and launches them in a rocket to try and get north of 60,000 feet. And of course, if you could imagine that actually happening, it would seem like a missile being launched from a NATO Air Force base pretty darn close to Russia. And so, World War III alert, and the settlement with the Russians is that this family needs to be sent away to the one place that they can never be heard from again. And of course, where is that? That's Area 51 in Nevada. So that's where they end up at Groom Lake, Nevada, where it turns out there's 38 different races of aliens from all over the universe who are living and working there in the bureaucracy, the sort of Bureau of Alien Affairs, kind of like air traffic control for the galaxy. And under Nevada state law, all the kids have got to go to high school till they're 18. So therefore, there's Groom Lake High, and that's where they go to school.
There's a little bit of everything there. It's never a one-to-one where, okay, well, that's that Harry Potter character but redone with science fiction. They're very original characters, but there are the traditional gray, big black-eyed aliens walking around. But then there are also big hairy beasts, all sorts of interesting people of all different sizes. And different creatures with that. And I wanted to ask you about your inciting incident, because it's a fantastic premise. Somebody shoots a rocket off of a military base and almost triggers World War III. But you could have done that with just two buddies. You could have done that with Sherman and his sister. You could have done that any number of ways, but you chose to do it just Sherman personally with his mother's ashes and without spoiling anything. What's the significance? And I'm playing devil's advocate here because I have some idea of what the significance might be. But for those looking to write a great story like Alienated, what's the significance of having having that initial action rooted in that emotional connection to Sherman's dead mother?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there's I can answer it on sort of two levels. One, just a sort of pure emotional level, and the other is more the mechanics of storytelling. From the kind of mechanical perspective, I suppose, as a writer and as a reader, you want to root for your main character. You want to give the reader a reason to be emotionally on side with your main character. So what I wanted to do is I needed to get Sherman into this utterly ridiculous situation, right? The whole premise is totally ridiculous. And I think the fun of Alienated is that I play it completely straight. But in order to do that, it can't be flippant. The inciting incident can't be flippant. You have to do it in a way, I think, where you fall for what Sherman's done, because he's basically done something really dumb. Right, he's done something incredibly stupid. He's fired a missile from an active NATO base pretty darn close to Russia. Now, why would somebody do something that stupid? Well, you have to think, okay, why would anybody actually do that? And you have to dig down quite deep emotionally to come up with something where it would be worth the risk. And so that's where the sort of mechanics and the building blocks of where the characters came from.
So you've got an ironclad alibi for Sherman's motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I always think every character in the book, in any book I write, but every character, particularly in Alienated, even those whom you would call the bullies or the baddies, they're all the star of their own movie. So they've all got motivations that make sense to them, even if from the reader's perspective, we would say, you might be reading those first couple of pages and say, Sherman, no, don't do that. This is only going to end badly for you. But for Sherman, it was a way of it was a last chance of doing something for his mom that she never got to do in life, and he wanted to honor her and to do this for her. And it was important. And he also realized that his father wouldn't understand. And that's another big part of the dimension of the book, is that he doesn't, again, it's a kind of a stupid thing, right? He doesn't talk to his dad. And all sorts of problems come up when you don't have good communication. And you're a dad, you're a parent, I'm a parent, and I'm very aware that as our kids get older, they're going to have secrets from us, and only bad things happen when there's secrets. Because if Sherman had just gone to his dad with his hand on his heart and said, "This is what I want to do," I bet you his dad probably at the time would have helped him. But he doesn't. He does it all by himself. And again, more things come out from that through the plot that ultimately he has to grapple with and repair that relationship with his father.
It's a great place to start, with just all of your conflict joined right there at the beginning. And I know this is going to be a series for you, so I wanted to ask: do you have a plan or a roadmap for what the next stories in the series are going to be, or are you kind of winging it by the seat of your pants just to see what comes along and what feels good at the time?
It's probably a mixture. I've got a rough idea of what I would like to have happen, and I've roughly mapped out the time periods in their lives that it should happen in. And so this book basically takes place over a few months, effectively towards the end of term of Sherman's freshman year at Groom Lake. Book 2 will take place over the summer. They're going to be sent away to an off-planet camp because if you've spent any time in Nevada in the summer, it's just too darn hot. So all of the kids, including the aliens...
No, intergalactic travel is the only way to address that issue. That makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. They're not going to camp in Maine. No, they're going to go to camp off-planet. And then the third book would come back when they're in 10th grade, and it would be the first few months, probably in the run-up to Christmas. And there's some characters that are minor characters in the first book who are almost just in the background, who we'll get to know a lot more, and we'll get to sense their motivations and their backstories. And that's where the conflict of it.
Did you know that about them when you introduced them, or has that been, I like that guy as I'm doing book 2, book 3, I'd like to see more of them, or is it a combination?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, what I tend to do when I write is I write character biographies. So I actually there's a lot of material, creative material on each character that never ended up on the page. Because if I put it on the page, the book would be 800 or 900 pages long. But so there's lots of secondary or tertiary characters that, again, as I was saying earlier, they're fully formed characters for themselves. You know, they're the star of their own movie, but they're not a star of this book. And so it'll give me an opportunity to bring them into really conflict, because that's where drama comes from, with Sherman and his friends. A bit the same way in this one, I chose to elevate the character of Ned, who's Ned, N-E-D, non-Earth deity, who is this sort of wanting to be omnipotent god. He's actually sort of a sub-god. And it's, you know, his character motivations as he wants to impress his family. His people are, or his race rather, are obsessed with drinking the magma of planets. And so that puts him in dire conflict with Sherman and the fate of the planet. And there's some comedy that comes with that.
Comedy, also the horror of For Our Poor Planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Let me ask you, you've talked about pulling in reluctant readers, and as I was reading Alienated, I noticed obviously you've kept the chapters short. There's a lot of action. You're never going very long without action, and there's a lot of humor. Is that markedly different than when you're writing for older readers? And can you talk a little bit about what techniques specifically you employ for middle grade writing?
Yeah, I think, you know, in a weird way, and this wasn't that conscious, but if you remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books, they were very short chapters, and then you got to make a decision. And I think one of the things I wanted to do with Alienated is I wanted to have fairly short chapters so that a reader could feel a sense of accomplishment. I think when you get to the end of a chapter, if you're a reluctant reader, you feel like, man, that's good. Look, I've just read 10 chapters or 20 chapters. And I think part of what I can do as a writer for that audience is I can offer them that sense of accomplishment. The humor helps, right? Because if you keep people laughing, they want to keep going. And we all love to laugh. But I think the idea of having sort of short, clippy chapters helps because you just get this sense of, hey, I can keep going. I can do this. I can read one more. Oh, it's only a few more pages. I'll keep going. I think it's something that we can offer the reader. It's
a nice feeling of accomplishment when you get there and get there quickly.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for people who are, are building up their level of confidence, my hope is, Alienated is, it's not an easy read. There's some big ideas and there's some big concepts and there's even some big words. But I'm also a big believer that somebody who might be a bit of a reluctant reader, maybe they're not going to get 100% of the vocabulary that's in the book, but they're going to understand what's going on, and that maybe they'll graduate out of Alienated and they'll tackle something that's a bit beefier, a bit meatier. But at the same time, I just hope they have a great ride.
And what is it you're hoping that most, other than a great ride, that readers will take away from Alienated?
I think there's a lot of lessons in here. I think there's definitely a big lesson about inclusiveness and about friendship and being friends with people who are, in the most extreme way, fundamentally different from you. And I think one of the things that not only we, as people who are looking after the interests of young people, but just people, frankly, on the planet, there's a lot of division out there right now. And there's a lot of people who are seeking to exploit division. And I actually think one of the themes of Alienated is, we're kind of all the same deep down. We can just get along. We can just get along. So that's probably the biggest thing for me, is this idea of, and I know there's lots of words that are thrown around, diversity and representation and inclusion, but fundamentally this is about the most diverse character set you can get, and really everybody gets along in the end in a way that's really, really beautiful, actually.
So that young readers might say, well, okay, some of the kids in my class are different from me, but we're all humans. At least we're not we're not that different. We could find a way to make this work.
That's kind of the gag. Yeah, that's kind of the gag. Is I think we as human beings do all sorts of things to make ourselves be different from other people, culturally, religion, whatever you name it. But actually, we're all very, very similar. And I think if we remember that, we can get along a lot better. And I think whether that's in a classroom environment or whether that's at a geopolitical level, I think it's a lesson worth remembering, and it's a lesson that comes very organically through the drama and the comedy in Alienated.
And a last question about Alienated, because I can't not ask it. You're referencing Area 51 in Groom Lake. You're referencing some popular UFO mythology, which you describe in the book, I believe, as being as mythological as Justin Bieber's musical talent, which is a description I just love. But are you a believer? Do you believe that flying saucers are about? How much stock do you put in UFO mythology?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really wrestle with this because on one hand, I'm a big believer in observable science. On the other hand, I think it's very arrogant of us as human beings to think that we're the only intelligent life in the universe. The universe is a really big place. And so I think I'm fairly optimistic that there's probably other life out there. Now, whether it's ever reached Earth is another sort of physics-based question I don't have an answer for. But yeah, I think I would be. I'm open-minded to believe that it's a big place, this universe, and we might be in our tiny little corner of it. At the same time, I don't think I've seen any evidence which makes me believe that, okay, absolutely, there has been an alien spaceship that has come to Earth. But I love science fiction. I love that kind of storytelling. So a bit like Mulder, I want to believe.
Yeah, unfortunately, I always have to offer that disclaimer out there anytime I talk about this, that hey, before I admit that, yes, I do believe that this is a thing, I want to believe it. So it's entirely possible that I'll be wrong. I haven't seen a UFO, but I do think there's now enough smoke that we can say, hey, could be some fire. Moving on back to writing, because this isn't the paranormal hour with Rob, although maybe one day we'll do that. But moving back to writing, I wanted to make sure I asked you about zombies. What is it about zombies that's brought you back? Because you've got a short film about a zombie. You've got 2 different series involving zombies. What do you love about them?
I want to do something. I want to do something with the zombie genre because I love the zombie genre, but the zombie genre is always from the point of view of survivors, right? And it's basically about slashing and slaying. And it's kind of the only socially acceptable form of murder, right? Killing zombies. And I basically wanted to turn the tables. And so that's where the character of Adam Meltzer. Adam Meltzer actually was a sort of spin-off from the short film. I made a short film a few years ago, really just for fun. It's online somewhere, and did a bunch of festivals when it came out.
You could view it at awesome.com, can't you?
Yeah, if you go to Awesome Media Ent, I think, or jeffnorton.com. I think there's links on there. And it was just a fun thing that we shot in my house over a weekend a few years ago. And it was about it was about a zombie who basically came back from the grave. And the gag was that he sort of had a second chance. And so it was all from his point of view. And he was kind of a useless guy. He was a bit useless father when he was alive. And this was a second chance for him to kind of make amends. And I took that little nugget of an idea and I put it into the character of Adam Meltzer. And what I did is I thought, like, who would be the kind of person for which becoming a zombie would be the absolute worst thing in the world? And it would be somebody who's got obsessive compulsive disorder, somebody who's totally disgusted by graying skin and flesh peeling off and arms that are falling off. And Adam is that character. He likes things just so. And so to become a zombie is the worst thing that can happen. And then bizarrely, over the course of the books, he realizes that actually he's got a second chance. And then in a weird way, it's one of the best things that happens to him because he meets some incredible friends that he would never, that once he becomes undead, he's sort of, the wool is pulled back over his eyes, and he's able to see that there is a supernatural dimension, if you will, to the world around him, and he's able to become, great friends with Karina, who is, spoiler alert, a vegan vampire. Or Nesto, the kind of cheeky chupacabra who lives behind him. And so this sort of gift that he gets of a second chance is really the gift of friendship. And again, there's a similar theme. He becomes friends with people that he would not ordinarily ever seek out or ever be friends with, and they couldn't be more different. And this little trio become besties.
Jeff, I could talk to you all day. I've got nonstop questions about taking an interesting situation and then finding the most interesting character for that situation. But I do want to ask you just two more questions, and we'll call it a day here. I want to ask first, what is your number one piece of advice for writers watching this? What can they do to tomorrow wake up and become a version of Jeff Norton? And two, where can readers or viewers find more about you?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, I think the first question, advice. I mean, I don't know if I'm anybody to give advice, but the one piece of insight that I've gleaned that has been useful is there's no other magic formula other than hours in the chair. And that my biggest advice I would share with fellow writers and fellow travelers is you got to put the hours in. And I know it's hard. You've got work, you've got kids, you've got lots of things that are vying for your time. And the life hack to be able to find is probably to find the day part where you can have that alone time. For me, it's early in the morning. I typically write when I'm fresh. The way my day plays out, I write very early in the mornings, and then I'm producing in the afternoon, the late mornings in the afternoon, really when North America wakes up.
So but how long is your typical writing session then?
I try and do a couple of hours every morning. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Some days are better than others. And I've got 2 kids, so there's some commitments that go with that. I try and wake up before anybody else in the house. So I basically do sort of 3 work shifts. I do a sort of very early writing shift. I do my day shift running awesome. And then I often, after dinner, get back on the phone with folks in LA or New York, because they've obviously got a more extended day versus here in London, we're 8 hours ahead of Los Angeles. So that would be my advice, is just put the hours in as much as possible every single day and make it habitual. I think if you can make it a habit, I've got a friend of mine who writes a book called The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg, and he sort of really unlocked this notion that if you can make something habitual, then it just becomes something your brain doesn't have to think about. Your subconscious mind kind of goes on autopilot. So if you can make the process of writing on autopilot, you're already ahead of the game. And then in terms of where you can kind of engage with me or find more things, I've got a website, which is jeffnorton.com. All my books are certainly on Amazon and in lots of good bookstores. I don't think we're in the bad bookstores. No, there's no bad bookstores. But yeah,
Jeff, they've been transformed from a bad bookstore to a good bookstore.
Yeah, I guess so. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, jeffnorton.com, or I am on Twitter. I do tweet from time to time as the Jeff Norton. So say hello, and I love chatting with other writers and other creatives. It's the thing about writing is it can be lonely. You're there at the laptop at the crack of dawn by yourself. So sometimes it's really nice to engage over. It's one of the nice things about social media is that you can kind of create a community that's from people all around the world. And I've made lifelong friends through the randomness of Twitter, and I think that's a really special thing.
I agree. So get out there, network with other writers, network with Jeff. Jeff, what's next for you? What can we be looking for?
Yeah, good question. I'm really excited. I'm just finishing off the final edit on a manuscript called Dino Knights. Dino Knights is medieval knights on the backs of dinosaurs, which is super cool. And awesome. A couple weeks ago, there was a big announcement in the Hollywood Reporter. It's being developed for television with Jim Henson Company, who obviously the company behind the Muppets. Dark Crystal is a show they're making for Netflix right now. The reboot of it's actually a prequel to the film. They made Labyrinth back in the day. So yeah, we're working on that right now. It's the show is going to be called Knights of Pantera. Pantera is the land where dinosaurs never went extinct. And it's sort of swashbuckling, high fantasy, high adventure fun. So it's a flippant pitch, but think Game of Thrones for a family audience.
Love it. I would watch every moment of that. And Jim Henson, I was just thinking they made that show, Dinosaurs, forever ago.
That's right.
They've still got some of those puppets lying around. They can just put some lights on there and you have your budget.
Oh my God, you got to see the creatures they're coming up with. It's I mean, I love that show when they did it, which is sort of almost like a live action cartoon. We're going for practical effects that basically look like we're right out of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, I'm sure whatever they can do now is going to blow that out of the water.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got 2 kids waiting for dinner. I so appreciate you being here. This was a whole heck of a lot of fun. Esteemed viewer, go check out Jeff at jeffnorton.com. Make sure you check out us at middlegradeninja.com. Don't forget to grab your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees and leave a review. Always appreciate it. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And Jeff, thanks again for being here.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you so much.